Hi, welcome to the Semantics lecture about assignment modification. We've seen assignment functions. They're very useful for understanding how pronouns work. But what we'll want to do is modify them, and that's going to allow us to do a lot of things like variable binding and variable binding. So what we will employ is a pretty straightforward technique. Now we'll recall the assignment function, and then I'll show you how to modify it, and that's going to be it. So, we have an assignment. Right? Recall that assignment will take a natural number and map it to some individual. Let's call this assignment G. And it maps 1 to Meg, 2 to Peter, 3 to Lois, and 4 to Brian. Now, if we have our pronouns, if we have our pronoun rule, G of 2 will be Peter, and G of 3 will be Lois, and so forth. And that works out pretty well. So how does a modified assignment work? Well, a modified assignment will take this assignment and change one of its assignments or add to it. So let's say that we take an assignment G modified so that 5 maps to Stewie. This is a slightly different assignment. It's not G anymore. It's G so that 5 maps to Stewie. Okay? And we'll show you what that looks like. So now we have this assignment that's been modified so that 5 equals Stewie. Now, you'll see the formal definition of assignment modification here, but what we want to focus on is the intuitive nature. Basically what this means is that we take assignment G and change it so that 5 is in the domain of G and that it maps to Stewie. If 5 isn't in the domain of G, we add it. And if it is in the domain of G, then we would just change it. So let's do that. So instead of saying that 5 maps to Stewie, we're going to have an assignment G where 1 maps to Stewie instead. So now we have a new assignment, G modified so that 1 maps to Stewie. And that's going to look like this. 1 maps to Stewie, 2 to Peter, 3 to Lois, 4 to Brian. That is to say, apart from the actual listed modification, we don't change anything. Change nothing at all. So now we have 3 assignments, 3 different assignments. The first one is G. The second one is G modified so that 5 maps to Stewie. And G modified so that 1 maps to Stewie. These are all distinct assignments. And we'll get different results as a result. So for instance, let's take G of 5. What is G of 5? G of 5 is undefined. Why? Well, because 5 isn't in the domain of the assignment function. You can't plug 5 in, it won't do anything with it. So this is undefined. I'll just give a hash mark. But if we say G modified so that 5 maps to Stewie of 5, now that's going to give us a result. That's going to give us Stewie. Okay, so now let's see this assignment modification in action. So G of 5 is going to end up meaning nothing at all, because we can't plug 5 into the function. It's not in its domain. It's not going to give us anything. So that's going to work out just fine. If we have G so that 5 modified so that 5 maps to Stewie of 5, well, now that is going to mean something because 5 is in the domain of this assignment function and it maps to Stewie, so it's going to give us Stewie. Now, on the third one, if we have G so that G modified so that 1 maps to Stewie and we plug in 5, that's also going to mean nothing because we haven't modified this assignment to put 5 in its domain. So in that case, we get distinct results depending on how we've modified the assignment. Now we can modify the assignment, we can change what we plug in, and we can get different results as well. So watch what happens if we plug in 1 instead of 5. So now we have g of 1 going to Meg, like we see here. On this assignment, we've modified it so that 5 maps to Stewie. So anything but 5 is going to be the same as it was under G, and in that case 1 will still point to Meg. But in this assignment we have 1 mapping to Stewie, and Stewie is going to be the result as a result. Right? We plug in 1 to this and we get Stewie. So it works out pretty well. Now how is this going to work for our variable binding? Well, I'll show you in just a moment. So for a variable assignment where we want the variable to be bound, essentially, what we'll see is that the trick is having the assignment be modified by having it something map not to an entity that's well defined, but to an entity with the name of the variable. So for instance, in this case, we would do something like this. G so that 1 maps to x of 1. So what does this do? Well, if we modify it so that 1 maps to x, well then our assignment's not going to look like that, it's going to look like this, x. And in that case, this is going to be x, just this letter x. And when we use it in a variable binding situation, which we'll see in another lecture, we will be able to bind this x, and we get us a binder. But that's how variable assignment modification works. We just define, we add to the domain, we specify a range for that member of the domain, and the rest of the function works as it had been. It's going to be a very useful tool for variable binding, and as a result, we introduce it independently here. But you should be able to practice it a little bit and get the hang of it, and then when we use it for variable binding, it should be pretty straightforward.